A key component of defining a category and positioning yourselves as a solution within the category is making sure that you have an enemy.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Category Champions. Today we have Ken Babcock. He's the CEO of Tango. Tango is building a new category around how knowledge workers work. It's changing the way we think about SOPs and documentation. It basically turns everything that you know into step-by-step guidance with no videos, no meetings, no screen shares. It's used by over 350,000 people at the world's top companies. And today we have their CEO. He's going to tell us all about what the story of Tango is. He's going to break it down step by step. He's going to share with us how this story was created and incubated. He's going to share with us how he thinks about competition, how he thinks about picking an enemy that you're fighting against, how to use content to tell that story, whether product or features should dictate that story or vice versa. And he will share with us how to measure whether your story is working or not. It's a great episode. Let's dive right in. So Ken, tell me about the story that Tango shares to the world, right? Do you guys have a strategic narrative or a framework that you guys use that kind of aligns product, marketing, recruiting, sales? What's the unifying story that Tango wants to change in the market?
Yeah, I mean, I'll start with our mission statement, which is make knowledge sharing effortless, and everything kind of cascades down from that. So, your mission statement, obviously a lot of people think about it as like the internal rallying cry, but you're using that, as a filter for every customer conversation you're having. You're using that as a way to actually like sell candidates on joining your company. So it all starts with the mission statement, and so it's pretty broad, but what I would say for us, around strategic narrative, and how we align marketing, commercial, engineering, and product, which is kind of our four teams. The story that we're telling is, hey, your tools are failing you, right? We're a documentation solution. We allow people to create, step-by-step tutorials, how-to guides that then turn into interactive walkthroughs for whether it's internal customers or external customers. And so what we're saying is, in a world before Tango, you're struggling to answer those questions. You're struggling to provide the knowledge that you need within your team because the weight of your tools, how many you have, how often they're changing, is just extremely burdensome. And so how that aligns us internally, obviously engineering is thinking about, how do we reduce friction in this process? Products thinking about, how do we integrate seamlessly with a lot of those tools that we're trying to solve for? And then, the marketing and the commercial story is really about, being better together with Tango. So, hey, you're making these huge investments in all these tools. How are you sure that you're maximizing the ROI? And that's really the narrative that our marketing team and sales team takes and brings to market.
I love it. We will break down that story in a second, but I want to ask you, how does that story come up, right? Like, what's the inception of that story? Is there a personal moment for you where you see that these tools are broken? Or what are the early days of that story when you realize there's a problem with the status quo of the world and there needs to be a solution to make it better?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it comes back to this like age-old framework around people, process, and technology. That's really the IP of any organization. It's been used since the 1950s. And you think about that and how organizations have sort of ebbed and flowed in terms of, what do we lean mostly on? Do we lean mostly on our people, our process, or our technology? It's never a perfect a third, right? And so, what I feel like I saw at my time at Uber and what I saw with a lot of my peers and what they were experiencing was, technology was seen as the solution for everything. Let's adopt a new SaaS tool. Let's adopt, a new framework for, how we ship product using these tools. And, the promises of a lot of those solutions, they can live up to them, but there's a ramp period, and people need to get acclimated to specific tools. People need to inject that into their day-to-day workflow. Something that I always come back to is, this idea that everybody's time is already allocated. It's not like there's this void of like, oh man, if I just had a software tool here, I'd fill this time with it. You really need to either be like saving people time, or there needs to be a clear ROI out the gate. And so where I saw a lot of these tools fail is they weren't doing that right away. And so how do we get people closer to being that power user, seeing that ROI, taking that tool to the next level in an acting process? And we felt that, the gap there was really around documentation and education and knowledge sharing around how you leverage those. And so what was seen as, oh, let's just adopt a bunch of software that's going to help us do this, people were ignoring the fact that, the software, it takes time to get really good at it. It's not just out of the box all of a sudden, oh my gosh, like I figured it all out.
I love it. Yeah, because usually from interviewing people on the podcast, like I see there's this brand story and then there's a founder story that kind of aligns to it, right? Like there's a founder category fit that like you have from that previous experience that kind of like shows where the opportunity is. I love that you guys have a broken status quo story, right? This is broken. I think on the website it says the way we teach and learn software is broken. We need to fundamentally change how knowledge workers get shit done. How do you kind of press where it hurts, right? Like, how do you demonstrate that this is a real problem to them? And how do you present that promised land after you press where it kind of hurts and see and make them feel that pain?
Yeah. So I think a key component of defining a category and positioning yourselves, as a solution within the category is making sure that you have an enemy, making sure that you have something you're taking down. Now you mentioned status quo, but I think you want to get more specific, right? When you talk about, certain products, Loom, for example, they're waging war on meetings, and other products are waging war on, calendaring, right? There's a lot that you have to have an enemy. And so for us, what we said and where this pushes on this pain point is our enemy is screen sharing. And the reason for that is not, we're not saying, hey, screen sharing's ineffective, because actually it is effective. It's personal. You're getting feedback. It's honestly like you're going straight to the subject matter expert. You and I could do it right here, and it would be like, hey, here's how they do this thing. And you'd be like, oh, great, I've got it. Perfect. But when you think about the nature of that, it involves interrupting somebody, finding time. There's no paper trail of what was discussed, or, there's no way to scale beyond that, like one-on-one conversation. And so for us, when we dug deeper into that enemy of screen sharing, we realized, okay, people do this a lot. Majority of people were saying to us that, hey, we do this multiple times a day. We find it effective, but man, if you told me there was a better way of doing something, we'd jump on it right away. If there's something better than screen sharing, I'm interested. And so in a lot of ways, you don't want to wage war on like the enemy that is, that everyone consensus agrees is, oh yeah, that's bad. That sucks. I agree. A lot of people hate meetings, but it's kind of tired in terms of an enemy. And so for us, we said, let's actually wage war on something that is effective, but it's not scalable, because ultimately what we're saying is what we're doing is also effective, but it's scalable. And so you really need to think about who that enemy is. And then people start to realize, oh, that is actually the pain I'm feeling.
It's like a non-obvious enemy, right? Like the enemy is wasting time, but the non-obvious is screen sharing. And one of the things that I love is that when I was doing research for the episode, and this was my next question actually, like you guys say it on the website, right? Screen sharing is not the answer. Like this is something that is purposely shown across the whole brand that you guys have, from website to socials. Like that enemy is attacked consistently to show that there's a better way.
Yeah. Well, it's the hook too. You want to have something that is a little controversial, isn't, coming back to the meetings piece, like you don't necessarily want there to be a consensus. And the reason for that is like, you want people to be intrigued. Oh, I've never heard that before. Or like, why is screen sharing the enemy? I do it all the time. and that piques people's interest and that brings them in. And so,
Love it.
yeah, it's everywhere because it's the hook. Now, is it perfectly describe the product? Does it describe the value that an end user receives? No, but it gets them started. It allows them to lean into it, and then say, oh, that's really cool. That is better than screen sharing. I do screen sharing all the time.
I love it. It shows them the category where they're at and the faults that their category has and the potential of a new category coming in.
Yep.
You guys published, I think this week or last week, an article about a new way to get work done where you introduce guidance. Does this story evolve as you evolve the product? And I guess a different way to phrase it, are new features shifting the story, or does the story drive the new features that you guys introduce?
It's a cop out. It's a bit of both. If I were to pick one, though, I think ultimately, being a product-led company, the product is going to drive that narrative. That being said, like, do we have a vision that we talk about internally? Do we have a vision that we talk about with investors? Yeah, absolutely. But we also recognize that when it comes from a category standpoint and a messaging standpoint, positioning, that stuff is going to evolve. Like as you increase your capabilities, what you're able to take on, what you're able to say, hey, this is the enemy, that changes. And part of it too is you also have to think about positioning relative to your competitors too. So, how do we provide something that's differentiated and not just another XYZ?
I love it. Which I was just going to ask you about that. On our first episode that we did on a previous show, we talked about competition. If you do a quick Google search, a couple competitors show up. How often do you compare yourself to them? How much attention do you pay to them? Is that something that you like? Do you see feature to feature versus them, or is the story also a defensible mode that you guys have? How do you think about competition in this sense?
Yeah, it's easy to, as an early stage company, as an early stage founder, it's easy to fall into a trap of focusing on competition quite a bit. But what we've always tried to keep ourselves at a distance a little bit. Competition, especially smaller upstarts that are sort of imitating what you've done.
Right.
They can absolutely serve as like good feature inspiration. I mean, we look at all kinds of products all the time to inspire some of our own product development. With competition though, the thing that you do want to pay attention to is how is our story different? Because ultimately you do have to tell that story in a sales process. In fact, for sales, some customers are required to evaluate competitors. It's part of their procurement process. The most sophisticated organizations, the Fortune 500s, you have to look at competitors and you have to be sure that you're picking the solution that's the best. And so, best might be, defined by a feature set, but, ultimately what you want that to be defined by is, yes, we have capabilities today, but we also, we can show kind of where we're going. I listened to a talk from Accenture's head of IT, which is a huge role at that company because
it's big. Yeah,
they've got software deployment, change management, digital transformation that they're doing for clients. And she said, for them to sign on to an early stage company and sign a deal, it's equal parts capabilities and vision. So, where is this product going to go? And so much of that is told through your narrative, through the category that you're going after.
I love that. Yeah, I have a bit of a beef with Accenture because when I was 20, I only applied to them and they didn't hire me. Them and Boston College Group, the Boston Group. I don't love them. Let's put it like that. I still remember. But I love that, right? And that vision can be shared through the product roadmap or through the brand story, or both, ideally, right? Like both have to be aligned.
Yeah.
In that article that we were mentioning before, you talk about how Tango is designed for people whose job is to train, teach, and empower. And you say you are the unsung heroes of every team. While your impact is often made behind the scenes, every organization would stop without you. Tell me a bit that you guys are kind of telling this story, right? Like a rags to riches story of the people that actually will implement with Tango. How do you tell that story for them, right? Like how do you make sure that these people are feeling connected to the story that you guys are sharing?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, one is, you need to understand your customers deeply, right? We can't just put that down on paper and hope that it resonates with people. That is what we've heard, and that's what we've witnessed, which is, knowledge sharing. If I'm the premier knowledge sharer within my organization, that typically doesn't come through in performance reviews. In fact, very few performance reviews measure or evaluate the impacts that you're having on others' development. It's always very myopically focused on you and what you're doing. So internally at Tango, we only have really 5 questions in a performance review. One of them is, how have you up-leveled the rest of the team? And that's a reflection on the product. And so we know that to be true. That is part of what informs it. When it comes to like telling the story and helping people go from, hey, you're an unsung hero, to you can have this huge impact and you can demonstrate it. A lot of that comes down to analytics and communicating the ROI. It's on us as a product team to show them the impact that they're having. So one of the features we released, in addition to guidance last week, was actually around viewership analytics. And it's the earliest form of viewership analytics. But eventually what we're going to be able to tell people is like, hey, you created this process with Tango. Hundreds of people have leveraged it. Hundreds of people have gotten through it completely. Maybe a few people have found like a better way to do it. But ultimately, like, that one thing you did has had a massive impact on your organization. And that becomes something that they can clearly position to their manager or their team leader or things like that.
There's something more tactical about it, right? Like something more concrete that they can show after, right? After Tango, what does the world look like after you use Tango? Mm-hmm. I love that. I saw that you also surveyed, I think it was 350 Tango customers about what they dislike most about how the documentation works.
Yeah.
Basically, the answers were not enough context or too much context. Tell me about the customer research part, right? Obviously, the answers show that this world is broken and there needs to be a better way. But tell me about the thinking about interviewing these people or surveying them, how to gather information, basically how to do customer research to inform product development, storytelling, and just building your brand around it.
Yes. So, and this is a good example because I think, what we started with in a lot of our research is, what is the incumbent? What are people doing today that they wouldn't have to do if they adopted Tango? Or, what are people used to doing that we have to kind of get them out of that behavior? And so for us, it's a lot of people manually grabbing screenshots, manually editing those screenshots, throwing them into a Word doc. I mean, it's pretty painful, right? And then, ultimately they have an end customer who's either someone on their team or a customer externally, and they get feedback on that, right? And so for us, we kind of started there and said, okay, hey, let's understand as much about the incumbent as possible and what people hate about it to build a great product that solves a lot of that. And so some of that research that you shared, where, the response was, the top 2 responses were, the documentation doesn't have enough context, or it has too much context.
Too much.
Most research teams would probably look at that and be like, oh God, what a failure. Like, let's scrap it.
Right.
But what we said was, let's actually dig deeper into that. So we talked to the users, who responded in both directions. And so I think that's a key part of user research too, is like, use those initial findings as, avenues through which you can explore something more deeply. And so we said, okay, let's talk to all the people that, said not enough. Let's talk to all the people that said too much. And, what we understood there is that within any process, there's going to be these like key moments that matter. There's going to be some stuff that's sort of brainless. You're clicking through, you're navigating to the point where then all of a sudden you need to make judgment. And so that highlights kind of both of those examples. If you share too much context on the stuff that isn't differentiated, who cares? And then, if you don't provide enough in those moments where someone has to make a judgment, they're going to be
in the critical moments.
Yeah, they're going to be stuck again. And so that has helped us think about, almost like not all steps of a process are created equally. And so we're starting to add more features, including call outs and headings that are going to signify, hey, that moment that matters, it's coming up. And here's what you need to know in order to execute that.
I have a couple questions before we get to the top of the hour. We have this brand story that you guys have that's so clear. How do you use content to kind of reinforce it, right? Because it's very easy to say, yeah, we'll put it on the website and that's about it. But how do you also take it to the world and show it to people?
So it's two ways. It's through our own content that we publish on our blog, and it's also through our community. And so, for us, you'll see kind of on our blog a lot of what we talk about is the ways you should be conducting, your knowledge transfer, knowledge management, the way you should be, documenting software. And so it's not just saying, oh, we've got a point of view. It's also, hey, here's the level of expertise that we have that supports that point of view. And so, when I come back to, I used to be like in college, I was a TA for a speaking class, a public speaking class. And we would always talk about kind of three elements of anything you say to people. There's ethos, pathos, and logos.
Logos, path, yeah.
Yeah, and it's a pretty simple framework, pretty common, but that ethos piece, that credibility, why should you believe me? That's where content plays a role, which is, hey, we're saying this thing, but we're backing it up with our own expertise. And then on the community side, that's probably more the pathos piece where, we're bringing together people that align with this positioning statement, this messaging framework. And we're talking to them and trying to understand, what do they do that's unique? What do they do that's would reinforce a lot of what we're saying? And so you need all those elements to kind of work in conjunction.
I love it. When you talk about community, is it more of a private community via Slack or via similar software, or is it just the people around the organization that you guys are in touch often?
So it's a bit of both. We do have a Slack community that anyone can join, which is obviously going to be more robust conversation. But community is broadly just, our user base.
I love it. No, that's great. I think private communities and stuff like that is when you're creating this category, you're creating a movement. Yep. And just like a religion has churches when they can congregate, private communities are the churches for the movement to congregate.
Totally.
Just a final question. We talked a lot about the story. How do you measure whether the story is working or not? How do you see if the story is resonating? Is it mostly qualitative data of people coming to sales calls and saying, I already know what you stand for? Do you guys have also KPIs for content and community? How do we see, okay, we're telling the story, is it working or is it not?
Yeah, and this is a tough one, but I mean, it comes down to kind of, brand awareness and reach, right? And so, obviously metrics around website traffic, conversions, those are those like quantitative pieces that matter. But also, understanding from a sales process, why are people coming to us? Why did they fill out the form? And so, those are some of those signals. I would say the other piece too is, making sure people understand what exactly the product does. I think that's something that a lot of SaaS companies, I mean, you can go to a website, you can read something that's like, oh, that's a really promising like ROI statement. but I have no idea what.
I have no idea what you guys do.
Yeah, like if you can live up to that promise, great. But like, what do you do? And so, setting expectations with your user base is key to them being successful. And so, if you're seeing a bunch of signups, but then people aren't activating, there's probably an element of that where like they don't, they were expecting one thing and then it became something else, and they were like, oh no, this isn't what I need. And so, as much as like you're selling this lofty aim of a movement, like you said, you are doing that. You still want people to be very clear on why you're, enabling this movement, why your product is enabling this movement.
I love it. Ken, I think we covered a lot. We're at the top of the hour. We'll put links to everywhere for people to find out more about Tango and about yourself. Ken, thank you so much for being here again.
Yeah, thanks for having me again. Good to be back for a second time.
Absolutely. My pleasure.